Firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak today. As Julie said, my name's Aleksia Jensen, and today my presentation is exploring the main findings of my honours thesis as part of my occupational therapy degree. Before I start, I'd like to say thank you to a few people, particularly Sarah Solomon, who's just sitting over there, who's a senior clinician occupational therapist at Bethlehem Hospital, and also my honours supervisor at the hospital. I would also like to thank my Monash University supervisor, Mrs. Linda Barclay, who couldn't come today. And I would like to thank each and every person that participated in this study and shared their experiences about assistive technology. And I'd also like to reiterate upon their behalf how much support and how grateful they are of both Bethlehem Hospital and the Motor Neuron Disease Association Victoria. So due to time limitations, I can't actually cover the entire scope of my research, but I'll just give you a few demographic details about the sample. So I had 2 participant groups in my qualitative study. 7 were Bethlehem Hospital clients with motor neuron disease, and 8 were their caregivers. There was another client who I was to interview, but she passed away before I actually got a chance to interview her. But her adult daughter actually gave me a bit of insight into what she thought she may have said. Most carers were partners to the client. Some were adult daughters. Individuals with motor neuron disease ranged in age between 54 to 77. 4 were male and 4 were female. Carers ranged in age from 27 to 79. 5 were male and 5 were female and 3 were male. So what is assistive technology? This is something that took a long time to actually work out myself. So according to the Independent Living Centre Australia, assistive technology, or AT, is any device, system or design that a person uses to perform a task or activity or increase the ease and safety of doing that activity or task. The activities explored in my study were any that the person did in their everyday life, ranging from self-care activities like eating, toileting, bathing or sleeping, leisure activities, study or work that required the use of basic or high-tech electrical AT by either the person or the carer. So why is it important that we research this? The advancing progression of motor neuron disease affects the person's ability to perform most life activities due to progressive muscle weakness and wasting. MND differs to many other conditions because its rapid and changing progression means AT often requires upgrades or changes throughout the disease progression, as changes in the person's abilities render the AT obsolete over time. This is challenging to the person because of recurrent decision-making and personal adjustment. It's also challenging to therapists, sometimes contending with AT funding systems, waiting lists, whilst trying to anticipate the person's future AT needs and being sensitive to the person and their family's psychological state. So what can therapists do? Health professionals can assist clients with adjusting to AT changes in several ways. Some clients felt they needed time to mentally adjust to the idea of AT changes, and we're grateful health professionals planted a seed in advance about what these may be. This allowed them to get used to the idea, maybe even reach a point of acceptance, or allowed them time to make changes, for example, structural changes in the house. Partially for this reason, most clients prefer being informed about AT throughout the service provision process, as the AT was needed, not all at the beginning when they started seeing the therapist. Several felt being informed about the available AT options was important. One client derived hope and stress relief from knowing of future AT options because there were answers. There was a step forward to enable their future independence. Knowing how to get the best result from AT helped adjustment in several individuals. This could alleviate the physical hurdle some had with the challenge or apprehension of learning to use new AT because of unfamiliarity and uncertainty of how it worked and behaved. Knowing AT would enable independent performance of a favourite activity helped adjustment to AT changes. This could also potentially assist the mental adjustment or acceptance of progressive loss of self and ability to do things with changes in AT, which was mentioned by many participants. Introduction of AT by the occupational therapist usually made the person more receptive to AT. However, one said that they were always shocked by what the OT suggested because they could never see them needing that. So how do the perspectives of the person and their caregiver differ? All clients and caregivers thought AT facilitated the client with MND's independence across areas of personal care, leisure, as well as enabling some to work with varying degrees of assistance required for participation. Of all life activities, socialising was enabled and maintained the most by AT from the perspective of all clients. In some instances, that meant that they could socialise by themselves without the caregiver having to attend with them. Carers unanimously felt AT enabled joint activities between them and the person they cared for. Examples of socialising included going out with friends or family, going to events, having visitors without needing the assistance from the visitor or caregivers. Several clients were enabled to communicate using the iPad through Facebook, Skype, messaging, emails or text-to-speech apps. This facilitated communication with family or others, as well as enabled those who could no longer speak to communicate without their caregiver, such as with health professionals and others. AT enabled several people to regain mobility, to get out of the house and into the community by themselves or with their family. Having a wheelchair-modified car or an electric wheelchair meant flexibility and freedom from being confined to the house, bed or chair, which was valued by both groups. Additionally, AT provided several persons and their carers with quality of life, particularly an ability to cope, assisting the person to be less frustrated and reliant on their caregiver, providing mental stimulation and connection to the world and others. Additionally, many carers felt AT enabled the person to still live at home with their family out of permanent care. AT items like nurse call bells, iPads, personal alarms and wheelchairs gave many carers peace of mind. They felt more comfortable leaving home to work or run errands, knowing the person could contact them or emergency services. Similarly, risk of falls were sometimes reduced by use of a wheelchair. Two carers also felt, because of the nurse call bell, that they did not always have to be in the vicinity of the person when both parties were at home. AT meant the person could do more on their own, enabling caregivers to work or study and in some cases pursue their own interests. 4 felt AT did not particularly impact their routine. However, 2 were retired and 1 had limited caregiving responsibilities because the client was mostly self-sufficient. Both groups felt AT assisted physically with caregiving. Several carers felt this reliance on AT increased over time as the client became less able to assist. Carers were divided in thinking AT saved time and it added time. Safety and reduction of injury was a benefit of AT for both groups. Most clients with MND preferred undertaking their own independent research into AT. Some clients and caregivers found it helpful knowing alternative AT providers to see a broader AT range. Both participant groups felt OTs had specialist knowledge and skills which assisted AT acquisition. For example, providing samples, brochures, websites, forms for AT, coordinating wheelchair-modified car acquisition and practical advice. One individual with MND and several caregivers felt assistance from their community OT and Bethlehem OT assisted the process of AT use and acquisition. Several caregivers were thankful and relieved therapists coordinated AT for them. The Motor Neuron Disease Association Victoria AT pool meant most costs were covered, providing both financial and stress relief. Other costs were small or often reduced through means organised by therapists. Some participants chose to buy AT like wheelchair-modified cars and hospital beds. One client and their caregiver stated the $50,000 cost of a wheelchair-modified car was a disincentive to purchase. Others acknowledged the cost but had compensation to fund this. One client felt a purchased hospital bed and electric lift recliner chair was expensive for what they were and a waste of money because they did not meet their expectations. Most clients with MND and their carers were aware of MND-AV AT wait times, and several were advised by therapists to put their name down in advance. Most participants felt wait times for various AT types were reasonable, within days or weeks. Others felt it could be months, but did not qualify if this was unreasonable or not. One caregiver felt AT wait times sometimes exceeded time of need, however commented that MND-AV could organise AT alternatives in urgent situations, and they were very appreciative. One carer remarked the waiting time for SWEP funding for a wheelchair-modified car was considered unsuitable to MND prognosis. Wait times for electric lift recliner chairs and hoists were sometimes considered longer than other AT items through MND-AV. Definitive conclusions about MND phenotype impacting the person and their caregivers' perspectives towards AT cannot be drawn from this study. This was because in some circumstances only one participant was interviewed with a particular MND phenotype. Future research could use a larger sample to provide more definitive conclusions. However, perspectives from both participant groups in this sample regarding AT were not evidently driven by the person's MND phenotype. Some individuals with slower forms of motor neuron disease felt similar grief from changes in AT to those with more rapid MND phenotypes. Another felt their slower acting MND made the adjustment process to AT easier. The two eldest individuals with MND in the participant group were simply relieved using AT. This could indicate older age could increase receptiveness of AT, or generational views of pragmatism could guide psychological approach to using AT. Personality also appeared to impact the client's approach to AT, as well as one carer, with regards to preference to research, self-sufficient approach to their own care, and planning for future AT ahead of need. Some caregivers appeared to frame their perspective towards AT as one step removed from the client with MND and felt the client should dictate their own AT choice. The stage of the client's disease appeared to impact the carer more than the MND phenotype itself. Some carers were struggling to cope with increases in caregiving responsibilities, as well as managing other responsibilities, such as child rearing and work, or even having any personal time. With some caregivers, this led to clear uncertainty of what AT would be able to help in the future. For example, would there be available solutions for when the client may not be able to communicate? Another caregiver had anxiety that he could not anticipate what would happen through the disease progression and if there would be any AT that could assist. Several individuals with MND, as well as one carer, also attributed their previous occupation or exposure to AT to being receptive to AT use. AT transportability and environmental accessibility impacted both participant groups. Several stated inability to transport the hoist, impeded holidaying and disability accommodation did not always cater to the person's AT needs. The electric wheelchair height meant the person could not get close to tables at home or at cafes. However, this could be overcome quite often by using wheelchair tray. The electric wheelchair also required a wheelchair modified car for transportability. Stairs in the community were another barrier to wheelchair use, but some felt a ramp could overcome this. AT design meant that AT use was not always maximised because of discomfort caused to the client. For example, with the reclining functions of the hospital bed or electric lift recliner chair. AT size from manufacturers was a significant barrier to a small statured individual, either being only available in one size, being non-adjustable, or petite sizes still being too large. This individual also felt the MND-AV AT pool needed a greater number of petite size AT for smaller size patients. However, this comment must be considered with knowledge that the MND-AV AT service tailors their AT range to meet the needs of a diverse range of clients based on recommendations from therapists who have experience working with clients with motor neuron disease. Individuals who therefore require different sizes of AT may therefore be better suited to acquire this from SWEP or to make temporary alterations to the AT through MND-AV, which would be done by the prescribing therapist. For example, adding cushions or additional padding. AT in this sample generally made life easier for both participant groups and attributed to making life better in many ways. AT had a clearly important role in assisting both the client with motor neuron disease and their caregiver in overcoming difficulties arising from a diagnosis of motor neuron disease. Benefits of AT in the main outweighed difficulties imposed by it. Therapists and the MND were considered integral to the process of acquiring and using AT. Future research should investigate the impact of MND phenotypes on attitudes towards AT using a larger sample size. This would assist in developing a deeper understanding of how different MND phenotypes present unique challenges to the client, their loved ones, as well as assist the therapist in guiding the person and their loved ones along the therapeutic journey. I'd like to leave you with a quote from one of the participants, which clearly emphasises the importance of AT that it had to their life, a comment that some other participants similarly felt. My life would not be worth living without AT. Thanks very much.